All right, good afternoon. I'm Fantasy Lozada, and I'm one of the committee members for the Black Caucus. And myself and Shawn Jones today, as he just introduced, are presenting this Tri-Caucus seminar for today, this webinar. And we are excited today to have a panel full of illustrious researchers and colleagues who have really figured out ways how to have successful and how to maintain these successful collaborations across a number of different areas. And we'll go ahead and get started today, but I wanted to give us a few sort of ground rules and to talk through how the webinar is going to go during this next hour and a half. So if you're just joining us, I'd ask for you to please, as soon as you get on, to mute your microphones. I still hear a little bit of background noise that may be from our panels, but I hear a little bit of typing, and that's going to make it difficult for us to have our conversation here today. So if you need some help in trying to figure out how to mute, put a note in the chat and we can figure out how to help you with that. But please keep your microphones muted, and we will be taking questions today, and when we take those questions, we will be taking them through the chat function. We'll go ahead and I will start introducing our panelists, and then we're going to actually have our conversations about collaboration and sort of chunks at a time. So we'll first start talking about collaboration across disciplines, and we'll take about 20 minutes to engage in that conversation. We have created 3 to 4 questions that we're going to ask each of our panelists to talk about with regard to that type of collaboration across disciplines. We will hold all of the questions for that until the end, and then we'll move on to the next, successful collaboration across institutions, and then successful collaboration between university and the community, and each of those in 20-minute blocks. All of the questions that you're going to have for our panelists, with all that they're talking about today, I certainly think that we'll be able to fit those in at the end. We'll have a nice little question and answer session for you to send in questions. So as you're thinking of them, go ahead and send them in the chat function. And Shawn is at a few times during our webinar going to remind you of that. So we will go ahead and get started and jumping into introducing our panelists. So today we have with us for discussing successful collaboration across disciplines, Drs. Rebecca White and Dr. Hirokazu Yoshikawa. Dr. Rebecca White is Associate Professor of Family and Human Development in the Sanford School of Social and Family Dynamics at Arizona State University, where she is also the co-director of the Latino Resilience Enterprise. Dr. White's program of research examines Mexican-origin Latino adolescents' development within cultural, neighborhood, and family contexts. Her primary project within the Latino Resilience Enterprise includes the Success in Latino Neighborhoods project. And Dr. White is a William T. Grant Foundation Scholar and has served on multiple editorial boards such as Developmental Psychology and Child Development. And finally, Dr. White serves as the Secretary of the SRCD Latino Caucus and a member of the SRCD's Ethnic Racial Issues Committee. We also have Dr. Hirokazu Yoshikawa as the Courtney Sal Ross Professor of Globalization and Education at NYU Steinhardt, a university professor at NYU, and the co-director of the Global Ties for Children Center at NYU. Dr. Yoshikawa's program of research examines the effects of public policies and programs related to immigration, early childhood, and poverty reduction on children's development. He is currently engaged in many projects, such as an initiative to provide early childhood programming for Syrian refugee families in the Middle East, the first experimental evaluation of an unconditional cash transfer to reduce early childhood poverty in the United States, and a research to policy project to address the crisis affecting children and youth affected by undocumented status in the United States. Dr. Yoshikawa was also recently elected as the 2018 Sam S. Coleman Fellow by the American Academy of Political and Social Science. We have also Dr. Oscar Barbarin. He's the chair and professor of the African American Studies Department at the University of Maryland, College Park. His research is focused on the social and familial determinants of ethnic and gender achievement gaps beginning in early childhood. He has developed a universal mental health screening system for children from pre-K to 8 and served as a primary investigator of a national study whose focus is on socio-emotional and academic development of boys of color, and done work with children of African descent in a 20-year longitudinal study of the effects of poverty and violence on child development in South Africa. Dr. Barbarin has received the honors of the Presidential Citation of Merit Award, an SRCD Award for Distinguished Contributions to Understanding International, Cultural, and Contextual Diversity in Child Development, and was elected to the Executive Committee for the International Union of Psychological Sciences. Next, we have Dr. Deborah Rivas-Drake. Dr. Deborah Rivas-Drake is an associate professor at the University of Michigan in psychology and education. Her research examines how adolescents navigate issues related to race and ethnicity in peer and family settings, and how these experiences inform their academic and socio-emotional development. Her work seeks to illuminate promising practices that help set diverse young people on trajectories of positive contribution to their schools and communities. She is currently the PI of the NSF-funded Teen Identity Development and Education Study, and is the co-author of the book Below the Surface, Talking with Teens About Race, Ethnicity, and Identity. Dr. Rivas-Drake recently completed a mid-career grant awarded by the Spencer Foundation. She is also currently the Associate Editor of Developmental Psychology. We have Dr. Noni Gaylord-Harden, and she's an associate professor and director of the Parents of Children's Coping Together Research Lab in the Department of Psychology at Loyola University in Chicago. Dr. Gaylord-Harden's research interests focus on stress and coping and psychological functioning in African American youth and families. Her recent work focuses on exposure to community violence as a stressor for African American youth in urban communities. She's interested in examining the variability in community violence exposure, identifying coping strategies that may be adaptive for community violence exposure, and understanding the processes of desensitization to community violence and how it may be linked to emotional and behavioral functioning. Her team uses findings of this research to advocate for strengths-based trauma-responsive services and interventions for youth exposed to violence. She's received funding from the Department of Justice, the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, the American Psychological Association, and the Institute of Education Sciences for her research efforts. And finally, we have Dr. Jayanthi Mistry. She's an associate professor in the Elliott Pearson Department of Child Study and Human Development at Tufts University. She's the co-principal investigator of the second Massachusetts Healthy Families Evaluation. Her research and teaching interests include cultural perspectives on children's development with a focus on ethnic minority, immigrant, and underrepresented communities in the United States, the development of cultural, ethnic, racial identities, and qualitative interpretive methods in the study of children's development. She is a member of the founding committee of SRCD Asian Caucus. She's an associate editor of Applied Developmental Science for Comparative Cultural Perspectives, and she's been funded by NSF, NIMH, and Children's Trust Fund, Kellogg Foundation, and the Brady Foundation. So as you all can hear, we have really here experts in collaboration, because I can't imagine all of the things that they do, all of the research, the impactful research that they do, that they would be able to do all of that alone. And so we're going to hear today from them about the ways that they go about making those partnerships, being collaborative, staying organized within that. They're going to share their perspectives with us about that today. So as I said before, we're going to start from the beginning with our first two panelists, Drs. Rebecca White and Dr. Hiro Yoshikawa. And if both of you could just describe an experience that reflects your collaborative experiences, in particular, across disciplines. So we're starting off talking about collaborations across disciplines. And if you could just start off with describing an experience that reflects your collaborative experience across disciplines.
Hiro, you want to go first?
I'm fine with either approach. Should we just go in the order that it was listed in the program, and then you go?
Sure.
Okay.
That was me? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Sorry. Well, good morning, and I want to thank the caucuses and the Black Caucus for hosting this event, and I'm really honored to be on a panel with such distinguished scholars. I feel like my collaborative experiences may or may not be unique. I'm not really sure. I don't have a particular disciplinary background. I have 4 degrees, counting a community college degree. Every single degree is in a different discipline. So reaching out to other scholars and other disciplines seems very natural to me. Some of my primary collaborations in the past have been with health economists, epidemiologists, and most recently, and probably the types of collaborations that are most strongly reflected in my, a majority of my contributions are collaborations with sociologists. I can highlight a recent collaboration I had with a sociologist who studies inequality in housing and wealth among diverse Latinos in the United States. She has expertise in differentiating U.S.-born Latinos and Latino immigrants who are naturalized citizens, legal permanent residents, and authorized and non-authorized residents. And disaggregating across these levels was a more nuanced perspective than other sociologists had, quantitative sociologists had previously taken, and a somewhat more nuanced perspective than some people, some of my co-panelists accepted from this, Dr. Yoshikawa, but then some people have taken in the developmental sciences. And we were aware, we both are on ASU's campus, we were aware that we were doing work that had some overlaps. And the way that we went about facilitating this collaboration was, first I invited her to do a brown bag talk in our research enterprise, Latino Resilience Enterprise. That's a space where we really try to create, just within the campus community or the larger campus community, a space where people from different disciplines who are doing work that might be relevant to anybody, any work with Latino youth and families and promoting equality, addressing inequality, can come and share their work and experiences. After she came and gave her talk, that enabled me to learn a little bit more about her approach and some of the language that she uses that may have been less familiar to me. And we definitely both, after the talk, had a lunch, an informal lunch or coffee, where we were able to talk a little bit more about where do we see ourselves going forward? Could we support one another? I can talk about that. It sounds very much like it just happened, but it was definitely a process, one that both of us had to invest in repeatedly. You know, starting with the brown bag talk, informal talk, lunches or coffees, really it was multiple of those. And then she said, well, I really want to do something with families. And I said, well, I haven't been doing anything with diversity and documentation status among Latinos. How can we think of a way to collaborate? So then it really became about, well, who has what kind of data that would enable us to form a collaboration, getting familiar with those kinds of things. We ultimately realized that she had a really interesting data set that allowed her to disaggregate documentation status in the way I described, and had some youth-related outcomes that I might be able to contribute expertise, but very limited youth-related outcomes. After just sort of looking through this data set, we were able to observe that one of the areas that had youth-related outcomes was on youth activities, which was not really a place where I had a lot of experience. So we had to draw in a third party to really give us some expertise on youth activities and start to have in-depth and meaningful conversations about how diversity in documentation status could influence or limit youth opportunities to access these critical youth resources. We drew a lot from Hiro's work. And then it was a really long process. The way that we had to get familiar with one another, with working with one another, with analyzing data, it probably took twice as long as a similar project would. And it required some constant and clear communication. Sociologists, for example, care a whole lot about probability-based samples, appropriate sample weighting, and having a very large number of control variables. Variables that I might see less as meaningful as controls, and maybe some I think, well, why are we going to control away for that when that could really be a mediating mechanism? I also, as a developmental scientist, I didn't have a strong understanding of population weights. I thought, why would we want to weight to the population when the whole population when where we're really trying to advance understanding is diversity among the Latino population. As a sociologist, she really wanted the data to be representative of for example, these were LA, of all LA County. So these were just issues that we had to have repeated. Sometimes they seemed like slow collaborations and communications over a very long period of time to get on the same page. But I will also say, she was incredibly open to educating me, and I was open to sharing with her about our developmental understandings of these things, and that really did help. We just got a notice of acceptance last week on this paper. We've probably been working on it for 2.5 years. So it definitely took longer, but I really did feel like I walked away with, previously I had read sociological literature and thought, I don't know why they're controlling for all these things. That just seems like a shocking amount of controls. And some of those we would conceptualize as mediators. And I walked away with a much better understanding that really can inform my future work as well in thinking about these issues, in interpreting sociological research that informs my work. And I think she has walked away, I think she would say she has a better understanding of how developmental folks sort of think about culture and stratification in ways that might be a little bit unique from how sociologists think about culture in particular, and to a lesser degree stratification. So I guess I'll share that as one of my primary or recent experiences, and one that I felt was really where I learned a lot.
Great, thanks for that wonderful example with a lot of I think you hit all the questions through the description of that one collaboration, which is great. I also want to thank the Black Caucus and the Tri-Caucus as a whole for this wonderful invitation. It's very exciting to see this next one in this series of webinars. So I'm going to talk about a few issues that have come up with a particular, so I probably collaborate the most with 2 different disciplines, economics and anthropology, and so I thought I might talk a little bit about my collaborations with cultural anthropologists and the settings in which those have occurred, and the time challenges and some of these issues and resources a little bit. So, so this has happened for me in 3 kinds of settings. The most accessible, maybe, is simply reaching out to colleagues in the particular school that I was teaching and doing research in, and reaching out to an anthropologist who was on the faculty. And that's really just starting with conversations, the way Rebecca was talking about how, really these all start with a cup of coffee, and then, right, years later, you've worked on a lot of things, and you had no idea that that initial conversation would turn into something. But in this case, this was a research project on linking large-scale social change to family processes and child and youth development in China, and was a collaboration that Niobe Wei and I started when I was at NYU. When I was then at the Harvard School of Education, reached out to Vanessa Peng, who's a anthropologist who studies China, and was interested in working with developmental psychologists, unusually. So I think she had an interest in kind of family and child development. So I think finding members of other disciplines who, where there's kind of this mutual interest in learning about the other discipline can be a productive way to go. So that was just basically within the same school and the group of faculty that I had joined. A second was in the context of really a professional development fellowship, and so this I want to also say a little bit more about later in the resources part. But this was a particular junior faculty fellowship in public health at the University of California, San Francisco at UCSF, in HIV/AIDS prevention for ethnic minority communities. And there, unusually, I got some of my first exposure to qualitative research training in a school of public health, which is quite unusual, but it was because the program was focused on developing new theory, instead of using assuming universal behavior theories were applicable to HIV prevention with Black, Latino, or Asian populations in the United States. there was an emphasis on developing new theory. And nearly all the projects of the folks who got these junior faculty fellowship grants included qualitative research. And so we were trained by an anthropologist named Andy Williams there. And then my cohort mate that year, I had two. I lucked out. I had fabulous cohort mates. One is Lisa Bola, who many of you who conduct intersectionality research would recognize her name. And the other was Hector Carrillo, who is actually an ethnographic sociologist and had completed a multi-year ethnography of Menuet sex with men in Guadalajara, Mexico at that point. So I learned a tremendous amount from them about the epistemological perspectives underlying ethnographic and qualitative research and work in anthropology and ethnographic qualitative sociology. The third setting was an explicitly interdisciplinary research network, which do exist, and I think some projects call for recruiting folks from multiple disciplines because the topic kind of calls for it. And this was a network brought together to study the welfare to work policies in the kind of 2000s around in the aftermath of the welfare reform legislation of 1996. And there I met both Tom Weisner and Kathy Eden. Tom Weisner, a cultural anthropologist, and Kathy Eden, a qualitative sociologist, and ended up reaching out to Tom for mentorship on a grant proposal, which became a very productive multi-year collaboration. And so so those three settings, I think, of kind of the academic institution where you're at, professional development, kinds of fellowships, and interdisciplinary projects, I think, have been useful. As far as time challenges, I agree these collaborations take a lot of time, but I think the reason they're so exciting is that you're learning a new kind of disciplinary perspective, and that just takes time. In the perspective of cultural anthropology in particular, I think, and the anthropology of human development, there is just an enormous time commitment to understanding what the data collection process is like, what analysis looks like, actually conducting enough of this data collection yourself, because that's very key. And for me, it was kind of baby steps with focus groups, then moving on to semi-structured interview studies, and then finally working with collaborators on longitudinal ethnography, first with Tom Weisner, then I should mention A.J. Chaudhry, who himself was trained by Carol Stack and Kathy Eden, a colleague here at NYU, and we co-directed a longitudinal ethnographic study of immigrant families and parents raising young kids in New York City. So that is an enormous amount of time. And reading, collecting, soaking in the data. So that's a big time challenge, I think. And it's a different kind of the multiple runs of statistical analyses that we also do, no less challenging. Around things I wish I knew prior to engaging in collaborative research, which was a question posed to us, I think costing out qualitative research was kind of a new thing. I still feel like I don't do it well because I think we often assume it's going to be less expensive somehow on some level than a typical grant for a study for longitudinal other kinds of methods. So often I found myself forgetting to leave out sufficient funding for translation and transcription for the analysis rather than just the data collection. So I think, and then I think sometimes people who might not be familiar with these methods, you know, make some assumptions that maybe it is cheaper on some level, and it's that's kind of not true, or it's just very hard to compare, right? Because it really is different forms of data. Finally, I think the resources or networks that can foster these collaborations, luckily, I think there are multiple kinds of grant mechanisms at multiple stages of career to that encourage mentorship, including across disciplines these days. So whether it's dissertation and pre-doc grants or the postdoctoral fellowship grants of the Spencer Foundation, which is a multidisciplinary focus on work related to education. William T. Grant Foundation aims to kind of foster mentorship that stretches your methods. The Foundation for Child Development also encourages multidisciplinary mentorship and contact and networks, and then certainly some of the NIH formal early career mechanisms. So I think there are funders out there to do that. The cup of coffee doesn't cost a lot, but I think the working together on proposals, kind of learning enough to get to the point to be able to work on a proposal together, which does take quite a bit of time, but it's been enormously enriching to my career, and I feel like it's added a tremendous amount to the core, I didn't even mention my core discipline, which is psychology. So I think I'll leave it at that and look forward to the rest of the comments.
Thank you so much, Hiro, for your comments. Rebecca, you as well. I actually want to circle back around because I feel like, Hiro, you've touched on sort of all of our questions in a variety of ways, which really starts a jumping off point for our conversation a little bit now and also more later. But Rebecca, do you have some things that you'd like to add in thinking about, particularly the time challenges? One thing that you identified, both you and Hiro identify, was that tension of going back and forth across disciplines. There are things that some people care about, or some disciplines really care about emphasizing much more than others, or than in psychology or in human development. But there's a great deal of time that things are going to take longer than you expect them to take because of the nature of the collaboration. And a few of those things about things that you wish you knew and the resources that you've used to support your research with collaborative partners.
Thanks, Fantasy. Can you all hear me okay? We good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Hiro. A lot of things that Hiro shared really ring true in some of my own experiences, and I think the time is a major issue. I feel like I have to, in addressing the time issue, I need to acknowledge that Arizona State University is in an environment that absolutely pushes transdisciplinary collaborations. The guidelines for promotion and tenure, for example, and the process of the reward processes are such that some time is built in, and most people at ASU that I communicate with and that I feel like are serving on committees, promotion and tenure committees, for example, respect that some transdisciplinary collaborations are going to require some more time. So I feel like my institution is one that really pushes for and rewards these collaborations. I also, in Hiro mentioning that he feels like his discipline has been, or our collaborative disciplines have been enriched by these collaborations, I want to say that I really identify with that, and I agree with it strongly. The challenges that we face in our society are not disciplinary. They're unlikely to be addressed with disciplinary solutions. ASU rewards faculty members who engage in transdisciplinary efforts to address challenges in our society, including our local community. So my experience is a little bit, it's strongly impacted by that system, the structures here at ASU and the systems of rewards here at ASU. I will acknowledge, though, that most, having been transitioned from the assistant to associate level in the past couple years, most of the time that I'm always working on these transdisciplinary collaborations, I'm also trying to make sure that some of my more discipline-centric work is continuing. And that enables me, in terms of career ladder kind of issues to, okay, well, this publication may have, and this collaboration may have taken, all of these years and is continuing to take time, but I'm also still producing some of my sort of more disciplinary stuff that I know where it goes and what journal outlets. Another challenge that I encountered time-wise with the collaboration I mentioned earlier is that we had a really hard time, where does this go? What journal outlet does it go in? And, we probably spent about a month just trying to figure that out, and we got desk rejected from our first one that I thought was like, these people will totally be open to it, and they weren't. So those are so at the same time, I'm trying to keep my some work going that is, I know where it has a home, or where it can find a home fairly easily and not be a challenge. I also have to acknowledge that even before ASU became this hub of transdisciplinary scholarship, and we have this president who really pushes these initiatives, I also was in a transdisciplinary school. So, I don't know how to comment on that because I've never been in a non-trans, interdisciplinary school, but I do feel like my school recognizes that some of these collaborations take more time. It creates spaces and opportunities that facilitate cross-disciplinary meetings and sharing of information and sharing of research. So in all of those ways, having those structures in place, transdisciplinary work can still be time-consuming, especially for an earlier or mid-career person, but there are also ways that my particular institution and my school had structures in place that supported that and made it easier and facilitated that kind of work. So yes, it takes time. I try to keep making sure I have other stuff in the pipeline, but also I am at a place where it's rewarded. I do have some lessons learned. I can draw from one of the most recent ones. So in this collaboration I described earlier with the housing and wealth inequality sociologist, I gathered very early on that in just comments that would come up during the process that she did not particularly appreciate how she perceived cultural researchers. And at first when I heard a couple of these comments, I was like, wow, that doesn't seem central to the work that we're doing. I don't think I need to sort of address or, in my view, kind of correct that perception. And so I let it go for a really long time and just thought, no, it's okay. It's not central to this work. This work is very descriptive, and I think we don't need to be on the same page about that issue to be successful in this work. But I did notice that by the end, it sort of came to a head. And one day we were kind of discussing how we were going to respond to reviewers on some issue, and she made a comment like, well, look, you cultural people think that all Latinos like living in crowded houses because, it's cultural. And I said, oh, no, that's not my view of culture. And we actually had to have like a 3-part discussion because there wasn't time to really finish it all in one, and sort of creating a space where we could come to some agreement on cultural perspectives on development. That wasn't about assuming, for example, culture. I think she had some ideas that people who do some of the kinds of work that we do or that I do are making assumptions about family structure and those kinds of things based on culture. And I was saying, no, that's not, that our work is about testing those assumptions and about highlighting within group variability among whichever cultural, ethnic, or racial groups we study. And that was a really enlightening process. And what I found, so the lesson learned was I should have never let it go that long. When I was clear from the beginning that we didn't share a joint definition of what culture was and how it worked in children's development, I should have said, hey, can we talk about this? And there were tons of other issues that we talked about that were helpful and that we also needed to talk about. But I think as soon as I realized we didn't share a definition of culture and of culturally informed research, I should have said, hey, can we talk about this? Because I think it's going to probably be important for our collaboration.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And sharing that, particularly with that last story, I think that's going to definitely generate a few questions and thinking about how to negotiate those types of situations in collaboration. I want to actually go ahead and keep us moving if we can get to the next set of panelists to talk through successful collaboration across institutions, where we'll have comments from Dr. Barbarin and Dr. Rivas-Drake. And as you saw with the first panel, people sort of talked about their experience and answered the rest of the questions throughout that, and I'm comfortable with that. But For both of our panelists, Dr. Barbarin or Dr. Rivas-Drake, would you like to start in at least describing the experience that reflects your collaborative experiences, and then moving into some of the other issues that we discussed?
Oscar, would you like to start? Okay, I can go ahead and get started. Yeah, does that sound good? Can you hear me? Can everybody?
We can hear you.
You know, I thank you. I also want to thank the Tri-Caucus group and the Black Caucus in particular for inviting me to be part of this. This is really cool and exciting. I love collaboration. I feel like I've learned some things, and I'm just so happy to be able to share some of that and talk more about these issues with the larger group. So I have actually been collaborating across, so our theme is across institutions, right? And I've been doing that since I was a postdoc. When I was at NYU, I wrote a couple of articles with a colleague who was at Princeton at the time. And I hear you, Rebecca, on the issue of the journals, because it's actually an interdisciplinary collaboration as well, because she was a sociologist. And we had so many conversations about where to submit, you know, and sort of like, and we ended up going with psychology journals, but even like thinking about what theories we would use or how we would frame the analyses or the study or the conceptualization, like for the sociological audience and for a top journal in sociology, you know, how that would work. And so we kind of worked those issues out, and in the end, we ended up going with psychology journals. But it was a great initial learning experience. Over the past couple of years, or over the past, sorry, maybe now 7 years, I have been collaborating with Adriana Omania-Taylor and with Dawn Witherspoon. Those are probably like my two longest and I think deepest collaborative situations. And I have written papers with both of them. I've developed a study with Adriana. Adriana and I also founded and funded the ERI and the 21st Century Study Group, which co-authored that group, which has also included many, many institutions, co-authored 4 papers together as well. We have written grants together, and we're currently, so Fantasy mentioned that I am the PI of the Teen Identity Development and Education Study, and that is for the Michigan site, and Adriana is the PI for the Arizona site. So we have a lot of things that we've worked on together, and we just completed writing, or last year we completed a book together, which we're now finalizing, which will be coming out later this year. So I can tell you a lot about collaborating across institutions with Adriana, as well as with Dawn. So Dawn and I have, and I think these names will be familiar to most of the audience, so, but if you have questions, they're both in my discipline, and so that's important, I think, to note, given the earlier conversation. Dawn and I have co-authored papers together, alternating lead authorship, which I'll say more about later. And we're currently working on a project for which she is the PI. It's a systematic review of the literature on ethnic and racial socialization. And I'm part of the team of collaborators, but she's really leading that. And there are several people on the call who are actually part of that team. So another type of collaboration that I wanted to mention that for me has been really great is collaborating with someone who has expertise in a method. And so I have developed a really great collaborative relationship with David Schaefer, who was at ASU and now is at UC Irvine, in part through Adriana. And what has been interesting about that is I tried to, so this might happen to folks as you go on, like there are new methods, new ideas, right? And Hiro mentioned, you know, taking on kind of new ways of studying issues. And sometimes you can sort of develop that expertise, but a lot of times the best you can do, the most you can hope for is to become an informed collaborator. So I got some grounding in network analysis and longitudinal social network analysis, and had some questions that like had to be answered. They have to be answered using this method. And I realized like So what I can do in 1 or 2 years is not going to be enough. Really, you need like a whole, set of training, like many years of learning how to do this and really applying. And so, but what's been really great working with David is that sort of I have this conceptual understanding of like what we're doing, and we can, I can understand the parameters and things that are relevant in the analyses, and it's just really fun, and it's more of a dialogue rather than sort of like handing it off to someone to analyze the data. And so we really have a two-way collaboration, and even though obviously I'm not able to do all of the analyses that he does, it's never like, I think he's interested in the conceptual pieces, and I'm interested in conceptually what's happening with the analyses, and so it's really a nice back and forth, I think, when we work on papers together. And Adriana, and I, along with my student Mike Medina, co-authored a paper as well. So I wanted to say that, so my collaborations have involved conceptualizing studies and analyses, preparing data, and as you heard, analysis, interpreting data, and troubleshooting and joint decision making. And I guess I wanted to say that, there are different types of collaborators and different types of collaborations. I was thinking about how my experiences, you can really see, maybe, I don't know if it's evident to everyone, that the work that I've done with Adriana, for example, is a type of collaboration where you and like another person and maybe one other person are equally invested, right? Like this is really at the top of the priority list or near the very top for all parties. And that everything that Adriana and I have done has really been like that. That's been the frame for the collaboration. Like we were both seeking that type of collaboration. Another type of collaboration, which is sort of more reflected in the work that I've done with Dawn and just many other collaborators that I've had that I'm not discussing in detail today, is where it's the priority for one, maybe two people, but not for the rest of the group. So you have a lot of stuff, everyone always has a lot of projects going on at the same time, and so it can't necessarily be everyone's priority, all the time. So I think it's just a really different situation. So I wanted to introduce that kind of into the conversation, just, that you want to be thinking about, what type of collaboration am I in, and what type of collaborations do I want to have. So when I think about the challenges, and this really came up with in the question of thinking about time challenges, I thought, well, usually if there are frustrations, to me, they're really closely related. There are many, many amazing things about collaborating, but doing it across a distance sometimes, and just across topics, across areas, across whatever, you really want to think about, like, scheduling and timelines and deadlines really relate to me to prioritization issues. So is it a priority for me more than others? And so I'm, thinking like there's this timeline and I would like other people to be on that same timeline, but it's not necessarily one of the priorities, or it's a priority but not a very top priority for other people. And I think being clear about, where the effort or the project stands on the list of priorities for each collaborator is really important. And so I feel like one of the things that you can do right at the outset is to be clear about that, about, I have lots of things going on. I really want to be part of this. I want to collaborate with you, but I'm able to do this or only this, or within this timeline, I'm able to dedicate this time. And just being clear about that, I think, really helps for whoever is organizing the effort, or, really leading up an effort in which you're not, really the part of the leadership, to be able to, like, work through how to involve different, especially if it's a larger group, how to involve people at different stages in the life of a project. So you may not necessarily have to attend like every single meeting. One of the projects that I mentioned with Dawn, that's sort of how it's working. I said, you know, I'm happy to be part of this, but I really need to let you know that, you know, this is like sort of what my my personal timeline looks like, and, you know, how does that fit with what, and here are the roles that I think that I could play, or what kind of a role would you like me to play, and if it makes sense, then, you know, great, then I would love to be part of it. But if it doesn't, then that's okay too. And when I invite someone to collaborate with me, I do also try to be clear about that, like what my expectations are, and, you know, ideally, you know, what I would, what kind of commitment I would like them to make to the effort of the project. And I think that really minimizes, like, you know, challenges, I think, inherent in, like, getting people to, like, meet and, you know, and prioritize. If you know, like, you're not available for a certain window, then they're just not involved in the scheduling for that window, but then they come back on later, or they're involved in the beginning, or whatever. And then, oh, sorry, you cut me off. Oh, go for it.
Sorry, Debbie. I just wanted to make sure that we got Oscar in here to hear a bit of his perspective as well.
Oh, okay, great.
Circle back around. Oscar, are you there? Dr. Barbarin, if you are speaking, we cannot hear you. Okay. Well, we're going to see if we can check in with Dr. Barbarin. Debbie, if you want us to continue on with the thoughts that you were sharing.
I will. Thank you. Okay, let me think about this. So,
hello, can you hear me?
Oh, great.
Oh, there we go. There you are.
Okay. I'm sorry. I've been, I made the mistake of setting up a microphone, and somehow that blocked, I couldn't hear anything. So I had to take the microphone off, so then you couldn't hear me. But anyway, I'm happy to be here. And actually, this is a great occasion. Can you see me as well, or no?
No.
No? Okay, well, it's just as well. The thing that I wanted to start with was to say, in some ways, this is a remarkable opportunity for me, because it made me look back. I didn't realize that I've been involved in 6 major collaborations across my career. And thinking about it, they really were quite instrumental in my own development and the transitions I made from one topic to another. I would say they fall into 2 categories, and they really are the ones in which I was younger, or ones in which I was invited to the party. That is, I didn't create it. I wasn't part of the creation of each of these, but I happened to be in the right place at the right time. One was a sickle cell project where pediatricians and nurses and social workers had been involved in collecting loads of socio-emotional data, but didn't know what to do with it. And so they brought me in to help them organize, analyze, and write up their data. That was good. It was difficult, but it was good. A lot of work. The second one is it was an invitation to join the University of Rochester's study of siblings of childhood cancer. And there I was invited in because they needed a black sample. And the other sites that were participating didn't have large, and so they knew that I had access to Detroit. And the third involved my going to South Africa as part of a grant that the University of Michigan got. And while there looking for research opportunities for students that I would bring over, I encountered this project, and they just happened to be needing a psychologist who could work with kids from 4 to 12, because the psychologist on it was more of a infant psychologist. And so again, I just happened to be there, and so they invited me. And then the others, I would say, were ones that I was involved in creating, either because I got a grant or because I created. So the last one actually was not so much, it was more creating a community of interest, taking advantage of an opportunity that SRCD provided to have interest groups around boys of color. And there we pulled people together with the goal of trying to see whether we could arrange marriages among people. That is, to within subgroups, to have them work together, do symposia, write grants, etc. And so that was more a facilitative thing. But one of the things that I would say is in terms of what I have learned and what I have try to take from this. The first thing regards time. There's just no way about it. It takes more time. Of course, I said that when I was doing primarily work in the community. So everything I've done takes more time. That's just a given. And so the question is, are there any better ways to manage your time? I'm not sure. I think the real question, the better question is the time worth it? Is there value added by the extra time that it's taking? And what takes time? Well, first of all, negotiating your role, developing a common language, building relationships. Trust, I would say, it's not, knowledge is secondary to trust among the collaborators. And so when you think about engaging in a collaboration, you have to think about this is going to be a relationship that has to be built on trust and on generosity, I think. The other thing that I would say is that you have to know your value, know what you bring to the table, know why it is that they're interested in having you, or what specifically. And then the second thing is I think you have to be generous in getting the work done. But along with being generous and giving of your time, that you have to be clear about what it is that you need and what it is that you want, being able to articulate that and to see whether that can come out of this collaboration. The third one is knowing your place. Part of that is knowing what you bring and knowing what your place in a particular collaboration is, and negotiating that role, being able to articulate it and to sort of establish where you want to be within that, what tasks you're able to do and want to do. In terms of things that I have learned, I would think that it is never clear how long any project will take, and it's usually always longer than you expect. But what I have found, and this was that I have gained a lot from each of these projects, more than I had imagined going in. And I think that in each case it was well worth it. The other thing that I learned is that the list of your unfinished products will increase, because usually when you're involved in a collaboration, there's so much data. You know, that one of the advantages of doing a collaboration rather than doing it as your own is that you can do something big, something bigger than you can do by yourself. And when you do something big, it means that there are lots of data and lots of things. And unfortunately, we're often in a position where we have to go on to find and do the next research grant and don't have enough time to mine the data. You know, I'm just amazed when I've gone back and looked at projects that I'd done 15 years ago. There were still papers that I had listed that had never quite gotten to writing. And in some ways it's unfortunate, but maybe those papers didn't need to be written. I'm not sure. I would say that over the long run, I think my career has prospered because of these collaborations, in that I think that young people could find opportunities to be involved where you're not necessarily the leader, where you're not doing all of the management of it, but where you can contribute. And then as you mature, as you get tenure, then you can take on the role of managing, creating some of these, bringing in people that can work together. So a lot of this should be phased according to where you are in your career. So I think I'll stop. Well, one lesson, this is an embarrassing lesson. When I began working with the NCDL, I really had a lot of, I think, sense of self-importance. And when I came into this project, which has already started, I looked at the research questions. So one of the things they were interested in, this was the quality of early childhood programs. And so a main question was, are half-day programs more effective than, or equally as effective as full-day programs? And I said to myself, that's not an interesting question at all. And it had to do more with my ignorance of the important policy, you know, that there are some questions that are driven by policy. And so having people on the collaborating team that were really in touch with departments of education, state departments, that really wanted to know, are we wasting our money, or can we get away with doing half-day? But that was a very important question. But it was not at all intellectually interesting to me at the time. And I said, and unfortunately, I said so to our collaborators, and they kind of looked at me. I won't say what they were thinking, but in the process of working with them, I came to realize that that really was an important question, an interesting question. And so when you collaborate, put aside for a moment your disciplinary lenses, put aside your theoretical perspectives about what you think is the most important thing to ask, and listen to other people and learn from them. And I think in each of those cases, I learned a lot. I learned many new things. I formed many good relationships that continue to this day. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Oscar and Debbie, for both of those perspectives. I mean, really great food for thought. I know, really thinking about doing projects in a big type of way, things that you wouldn't be able to do on your own. I think that's such an important takeaway, as well as, you ending on this note of sort of putting aside your own sort of agenda, your own sort of theoretical lens and disciplinary perspective to make those connections, I think is so important. And so we've been hearing a lot of similar themes, I think, in the first about working across disciplines and now working across institutions. And so now we're going to hear from a different, or it might not be different, but another perspective in thinking about collaboration between the university and the community in general. So as you were saying, Oscar, there are some questions that may not be intellectually interesting, but they are practical from a policy standpoint. And I think that we'll find in hearing about the community that there are also going to be things that the community wants to know, or the community has particular stakes in, that we as researchers have to think about when we engage in those collaborations. So we're going to hear from Drs. Noni Gaylord-Harden and Dr. Jayanthi Mistry. And could one of you go ahead and start telling us about your own experiences with collaborating between the university and the community?
Noni, you want to go first? If we go in the order.
I think I'm listed, so I'll take that. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So well, I guess it's good afternoon now for you guys, and thank you to the caucuses, especially the Black Caucus, for the invitation to be part of this panel with such a distinguished group of scholars. I have already learned so much. I've been taking notes from you guys, so thank you for sharing your experience.
If you could speak up just a little bit, Noni. You're a little low.
A little low. Let me try one thing here. Is that better?
You sound a little clearer.
All right. Okay, so most of my collaborative research has occurred in the schools here in Chicago, and I realized in thinking about this panel that I've worked with probably about 15 different schools in Chicago in different roles. Most of that work has been in data collection, survey-based data collection. We've also collected some neuropsych batteries with youth in Chicago and schools. We've also conducted focus groups, and I've worked on a couple of projects where we've delivered interventions in the schools. I have also worked with a couple of community organizations, and all of the schools and agencies that I work with are predominantly or exclusively African American, and given the nature of my work on violence, my work tends to be located in schools and communities with disproportionately high levels of poverty and violence. And I think it's really important to engage with communities not as an expert, but as a collaborator, and not seeking to help, but seeking to empower. And so we try to frame all of our work as being a collaborator and seeking to empower communities. My partnerships pre-tenure tended to come out of existing relationships with schools. There were some cases where I just reached out to schools. And post-tenure, some of these things have come about just, I also kind of mentioned, being in the right place at the right time. One of my partnerships that has been probably the most successful included work with an all-male charter high school here in Chicago. There are 3 schools in this system. I just happened to be on a panel about youth violence, and the school counselor from one of the schools was also on the panel, and she and I talked more about our work after the panel, and she expressed a desire to make more data-driven decisions about how to enhance the social and emotional development of her students. And she asked if I could assist with that. And so, sure, and I told her a little bit about what we do around our survey-based work. And I asked her to develop a list of constructs that she wanted to measure. And my research team identified free surveys for them that, address each construct. And the agreement was that we would also include constructs that were of interest to our research. Most of those were covered by her interest, but there were a couple that we were also interested in, so that everybody could kind of get what they wanted or needed out of the relationship. I thought about this when Oscar mentioned a second ago, that sometimes you have to put aside what you think is important, and I think you always have to do that with community-based collaborations. And some of the constructs they mentioned were of no interest to us, but they were important for them, and so we found the best measures that we could for them to use in this survey packet. And so we were able to go in and collect the data for them. We've published on that data, but we've also worked with them to help them use the data to impact their programming at the schools. And so we have tried to make this more of a long-term relationship. And I also want to mention this. When I enter partnerships, I enter them with the goal of developing a long-term relationship. How can we continue the partnership even after I finish data collection or after an intervention is over? What I've learned is that many schools here in Chicago have a very high staff turnover rate, and that includes principals. I have had situations where I've been working with a principal. I walk into a school on Monday morning, and there's a completely new principal with no warning to the staff, the children, and especially not me, because I'm at the bottom of that list, right? So I'm always cognizant that the relationship may end prematurely and unexpectedly. And so I always make decisions based on kind of the campsite rule, that if we're not going to be able to continue this relationship, I need to leave the setting and the people in that setting in better shape than I found them. And that's, I think, what's most important. And some of that has to do with finding ways to give back. When I worked with schools, especially pre-tenure, when I was kind of approaching schools, I always tried to ask what I could offer up front, and I was collecting data with the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students in a couple of schools. And one of the schools, the principal said, well, what we want are social skills training for the little kids, the 1st and 2nd graders. Can you do that? And you kind of approach it like an actor would approach. Actors never say no, they can't ride a horse, or they can, whatever you ask to do, yes, I can do that. I don't do a lot of work with 1st and 2nd graders, but I said, yes, we can do that. And I put my research team in charge of finding a social skills training program, and we, got everybody trained, and we hired a team of undergraduates, trained them, and they went in and delivered that social skills training group to the 1st and 2nd graders, and we were collecting data with the older youth. I'm also the Family Support Agency. I'm no longer collecting data there. That project's been over for years, but I serve on the advisory board and also the development board for this agency. And I assist with program development and also fundraising efforts as a way to, to say thank you for allowing me to be a part of that partnership. I think it's important to go back and present research findings in ways that will serve the good of the school or the organization. Connect your findings back to their mission and their current work. Again, they had measures at that school that we were not interested in. And I could have easily gone back and talked about all of our studies, on that data, but we instead talked about the constructs that were of most importance to them and connected it back to the work that they were doing with the young people. We've also worked with agencies to help use the data that we collect in their efforts to obtain funding. And I think this is more important for community agencies. So we've even written paragraphs for them to include grant applications to help them with obtaining funding as a way to kind of give back and thank them for allowing us to work with them at their agencies or schools. In fantasy, I have some answers to the questions, but I can hold off on those if you.
Yeah, sure. If we could go ahead and have Jayanthi weigh in a bit, and then both of you can kind of talk about what some of those challenges are, or what you've addressed some of those, but a number of other different perspectives you might have.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate also this opportunity, and I'm privileged. I remember actually, I think Hiro might also remember this, that early on when the Asian caucus was just forming, at some point we had talked about how important it would be to have Tri-Caucus events. So I'm just really honored to be part of this. So I've been listening to all that people have said, and what I want to add, I know I'm talking about the university and community challenges, so I'm going to begin by giving you examples, 2 examples of things that I've been involved in. But in response to the other questions, I'll just basically pick up on what others have said and add something to it. So I'll try to be brief. In terms of the university community collaborations, I want to mention that, first of all, my own background is I've had all my degrees in child development, which all of you know is very interdisciplinary as a discipline. The second facet about this is the focus on applied work. So right from the beginning of my training, both of these are very critical to me. But the applied work means working in communities. And so that has been something I've done right from the beginning. Initially, and fortunately, I'm at an institution, Tufts University, which both at my department level as well as at the university level really buys into this notion of applied and civic engagement and community connections. And so that's something that I've also been, it's been a privilege to have had that support. So with that context, I want to differentiate first between 2 types of collaborations with the community that I've always been part of. And one is the collaboration around programs. So when you're an applied program, you cannot actually educate your students, undergraduates or graduates, without having partnerships with people and community-based organizations. So that has always been part of it. And for me, some of the best collaborations have emerged because we collaborated with local schools around educational programs, but research projects would emerge out of that. Okay, I'll come back to this point a little later. The second type of collaborations is, of course, the ones that really originate from around a research topic. And I'm going to share 2 examples of this. One is a very small project, but a very critical one. And the second one is a larger, more systematic and systemic kind of approach to university and community collaborations. The first one, which is the smaller example, was at some event, I got a chance to meet with the executive director of a community-based organization. And in the course of a conversation, where I was very interested in, I was doing a lot of scholarship around children who have to navigate multiple cultural settings. So they're living in multiple worlds, biculturalism, you can call it biculturalism, etc. And as I was talking about this, the person I was talking with, the executive director, Warren Goldstein-Gelb from Somerville, and Alex Perry, both of them were so excited when they heard about this because they said, you know, we are running a program for Somerville High School students who are immigrants, who are bilingual, and we thought that we should treat that as an asset. They had a program where they were training these bilingual youth to become linguistic interpreters. Then their 2 organizations would actually hire these bilingual interpreters to do the interpretation at community-based events in order to increase community engagement. So here were people who had taken the idea that I was theoretically thinking about, but actually had kind of worked on the implementation and using it. So for me, this was such a learning example. It just brought home to me that the community organizations are engaged in work that could be considered knowledge producing as well. So we began, I said that I recruited a couple of students, and through in a very small way, we did an ethnographic kind of formative evaluation of this program. And in that process, with the community partners and we researchers from Tufts, we really did so much of an engagement of our perspectives. So one of the things, so from that, one of the things that I did was I didn't wait till the project was done to share information. We used some of the techniques of community-based participatory research and participatory action research to do things like community report back. So while we were analyzing the data and collecting the data, we'd prepare the data and share it with our partners to have them help us interpret and understand what was going. So there was an exchange of information to me, which was very critical to our collaboration. So that's one example. The second example I wanted to mention is a project that is much larger, that is funded externally by NSF, and it is a curriculum development and research project that is led by Christy McQuain, my colleague here at Tufts. And in this, we are partnering with a large organization that runs all of the Head Start programs in Boston, the ABCD program, and the collaboration has started more systemically. Now, of course, it took time to build relationships and the trust that other people have talked about, but the reason I think this one works is because we have the resources to be able to actually pay attention to the process of collaboration. So we think about it, it's part of the research plan to document what it takes to actually do the collaboration. So I'll stop with that and we can cycle back to the other questions if you'd like, or I can keep going.
Yes, we just have a few more minutes before we're going to open up to the broader Q&A, and it looks like Shawn has been getting some amazing questions, so we definitely want to save some time for that. But if there are just a few other thoughts that you might want to share about sort of the managing of time, particularly community work, which we know has a number of additional complexities with it, as well as any advice about that thing you wish you knew before you started.
So I can quickly, I will add, yes, I can do that. So in terms of things that I wish I knew, what I wish I knew was having some guidelines or guidance about how to do the collaborations. And the point is that now, actually there's a literature base on things like community-based participatory research and participatory action research. So I think my advice to people who are pre-tenure, look, there is a literature that because people have done this and written about the process, which I think is important. The second thing that I want to pick up on is what I think Rebecca mentioned right early on, the looking within one's institution. So I mentioned here Tufts. Now Tufts has a whole college, the Tisch College, which is a college focused on civic engagement and citizenship. And there are a lot of little small funding opportunities that I have been able to make use of to get students involved in doing some of the work. So that's what makes it possible to actually do the work. The second thing I want to just mention is when I began the work with the first project I mentioned, the Linguistic Interpreters Project, I was teaching courses, and because in our department we have applied internships, that work I was able to do it by really getting students involved through independent studies, internship opportunities, as well as coursework, so that they would do some of the work around our work with that community partners through the process of earning their course credits. So this kind of dovetailing was the way in which I was able to, do some of the work while also doing what I was doing normally anyways as part of as a faculty member. So the dovetailing, or kind of, trying to kill two birds with one stone, if that's the correct idiom, but that was what enabled me to do it in the beginning, and I think that I wanted to just emphasize.
Jayanthi, actually, so thank you for that. I want to, because we are bumping up right against the Q&A time, and so I want to go ahead, unless Noni, you have an additional thing you want to say right here at the end, but if we could go ahead and open up for questions, because we have some really great ones that I think we want to get to. I think Shawn is going to take over this session, and we'll probably take over the PowerPoint.
I mean, I had points, but people can email me. I can send those for pre-tenure folks. I have some bullet points for them, but people can email me and I can send that information. So we can go ahead with the Q&A.
Okay, thank you so much, Noni. So Noni just said that she does have some bullet points and some points of wisdom for pre-tenure individuals that she is happy to share at the conclusion. So we'll be sure to get those and to get those out to our participants this afternoon. Okay, so I am going to try to work with technology, but in the interest of time, I'm going to just kind of verbalize the first question that we got from our audience, and then I'll try to see if we can shift our PowerPoint presentations. So many of you all, again, thanks so much, have spoken to these conversations that you all have had with your various partnerships, be they interdisciplinary or across institutions, or most recently with community agencies or schools. So one of the questions that we have here that any of you all can speak to, and we'd like as many of you all to speak to, is how exactly do you all have these potentially tough conversations with your collaborators, right? So some examples are, differences of opinion about the purpose or the outcomes, or things like authorship or outlets. I know, Debbie, for example, you spoke to. So can you all say a little bit more about when you all have these potentially tough conversations with your collaborators?
Can I just start with just one attempt? And I think for me what has been important is to differentiate, especially in terms of the outlets or what is the outcome of the work. For me, what it's been important to differentiate between what I need to get out as a faculty member or as a scholar versus what the community needs, community agency needs in terms of outcomes. And I try to think about outcomes or dissemination that targets what they need and what they have come to me to work with me around versus what I need to do for, in terms of publication. So the whole notion of community report backs or writing brief reports, or as one of the other panelist members, sometimes just writing a paragraph or two for their grants. That to me was something that had to be negotiated and but successfully.
Thank you. Others?
I think because I brought up some of the authorship issues, I don't mind chiming in here to just say that I think the best time to have the conversations is right at the beginning. So if you're invited to co-author or be part of a project in which, writing presumably will be part of the dissemination effort, I think just being really honest with yourself about what do you have on your plate and how much, where do you fit this effort into that, picture, and when you do make a commitment, being clear about what it is that you're committing to and that, your collaborator feels comfortable with that. And then the other thing is if you are inviting others, to be part of a collaboration that you are leading or developing, which I actually did do before tenure. I didn't really realize it was something not to do before tenure, but and for whatever that's worth, I think that it's really, again, at the outset, like really being clear about what the commitment is. And so for like the study group, for example, we had letters of commitment that spelled out sort of like what are the expectations from each person. It wasn't just like this haphazard thing that we just, invited a bunch of great scholars into a room and to attend a conference. It was like everyone was informed of what was expected of them. Yeah, so I'll just say that.
Awesome, thank you, Debbie. Any other response? Okay. If not, we'll go ahead and jump into our second question that we received from our audience for you all. So it should be showing on the screen now, but the question is, can you all speak more specifically to funding opportunities for the collaborations that you have taken up in your scholarship? And again, that's open to any of our 6 panelists.
I'm going to take a shot again to just get us going. And I think Hiro had mentioned earlier a number of organizations that are really interested in transdisciplinary work as well as more kind of, applied work. So I'm not going to repeat that, but I'm just going to mention another thing. I think funding agencies that are within cities and towns, again, to fund community-based research or collaborations between the university and the community, looking at local research, local private foundations that are interested in particular areas of, applied work sometimes can be useful. And again, looking internally within the university itself has been very useful for me.
Yeah, I would second that. I guess I'll chime in again. I had written down that SRCD and SRA funded our study group initially. I know the second iteration of the study group was founded by NSF. I think it's conference funding, which they have, I believe it's discretionary to the program officer. I'm not sure about that though. But so NSF is a place that you can go get money to pull a group of people together to work on a big problem or develop a grant together, or have a conference around a topic that then leads to other things. The lowest cost way to start a collaboration with someone across institutions is to meet up with them at the conference that you'll both be. I wanted to make sure I put that out there. That is how I started, I think, I can't remember now, collaborating with Adriana. And then, I think doing a lot of the work virtually really cuts costs. And we have, all of my collaborators and I have done lots of video conferencing. We've run, meetings just using the tools, that are available to us, that are available to anyone. And the last thing I'll say is you can use your own, find out if you can, use your own funds, like some startups for early career folks, to bring collaborators in or to travel to other institutions, to your collaborators' institutions, to do the work of the planning of the project and things like that. I did that, and I've also had folks come here. And also I have spent funds to have writing retreats, which I also want to plug. I'm really a big fan of having like 2 to 3 days where you dedicate to just writing working on a piece or whatever it is you're working on, the grant that's dedicated, where both of you are away from your office, even the one who's on campus, really doing a lot of the in-depth work that needs to be done, sometimes more in person.
This is Rebecca. I wanted to comment about this too, if it's okay. So one of the things, I have currently 3 different funding mechanisms that are currently funded, and I sincerely believe the only reason they're funded is because they reflect transdisciplinary work and a group of transdisciplinary scholars bringing different perspectives to the research questions. So, and many of them are funded by some of the organizations, for example, that Hiro mentioned earlier. But I also just want to observe, it's not all like a barrier. So for example, drawing from Debbie's success and Adriana's success and the ERI working group's success, I recently collaborated with Dawn Witherspoon to put in a meeting proposal to NSF. She and I wrote that's to bring economists, developmental psychologists, public health, demographers all together to advance what we're calling the next generation of neighborhood effects scholarship, right? And when we got the call that's currently being recommended for funding, we submitted, I don't know what that means because there's barely a budget, but when we submitted our meeting proposal, we submitted to the Developmental Sciences Division. And when the PO called us to say, I'm excited to tell you guys, we're recommending this for funding, but we need some more information, he said the most exciting part for him was that he had shared it with the Sociology Division, and that the sociology division was interested in co-sponsoring it. Well, what this means for the developmental sciences division is that they get a project for half cost. And the PO congratulated us repeatedly for drawing the attention and support of another division. This was a huge boon to the PO and to the developmental sciences division. And quite frankly, I was a little bit surprised at how repeatedly he was like, this is so exciting, this is really great that you were able to, attract the investment and funding and attention of a different discipline, of multiple divisions at NSF. And so in that way, there are challenges to reaching, at least across disciplines and across these other contexts we're discussing today, but there also are rewards, and this was an example of a reward where, other resources were brought to the table because we attracted the attention of a different discipline.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that. I really appreciate that, and I think that was all of your responses were great and really, I think, helped. So hopefully for those out there in the chatterverse who sent in those questions, you're feeling good about the responses and feedback that you received. So I am being mindful of our time. We're currently at 1:28 here out in the East Coast. So on behalf of myself and Fantasy Lozada, just more broadly on behalf of the Black Caucus of SRCD, we'd like to thank you all so much to our panelists. I'm going to do an actual clap since I have it on. Those of us who can join us silently behind the mics to give a rousing round of applause to our 6 panelists. We're just so thrilled. Again, similar to what Noni said, I mean, taking copious notes over here even while trying to help co-facilitate because it was just such a wealth of knowledge. And so we're so grateful for your time, for our audience. We're grateful for your attention and really engaging with us. We strive as a Tri-Caucus to continue to make these webinars accessible and engaging for all of our membership. And so we're so glad that you tuned in with us this afternoon. Please stay tuned for the next of our Tri-Caucus webinars, which will be forthcoming. Again, as Dr. Mia Smith-Bynum said at the outset, we have been recording today's session, and so you all should get details in the coming days about how to access that. And so as a way to kind of disseminate that and share that with those who were not able to attend this afternoon. But again, I'm so very grateful for you all joining and tuning in with us this afternoon. And I want to wish you all a great rest of your Monday and a great rest of your week. And again, take care, everyone. Be well.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks to the organizers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peace, everyone.